Pleased to be joined now by the one, the only, the legendary, the incomparable, one of my oldest friends in the business of online football content, the godfather of quarterback analysis, the Turk to my JD from Touchdown Wire. It is Mark Schofield. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time to join us at Blocking the Boys.
RJ, if you're going to drop a Scrubs reference on me to kick off my week, it's going to be a good week, and I'm very excited. I'm very excited to be here. It gave me a reason because I know we're going to talk mechanics. I dusted off my mechanics Bible, Coaching Quarterback Passing Mechanics by Steve Axman, who was Troy Aikman's college coach for a while. So this is my go-to Bible. I know we're going to talk Dak Prescott mechanics. I'm very excited to do that. Very excited to be with you. I know you had some news that you broke over the weekend. And again, my congratulations to you and your family, buddy. Exciting times.
Thank you very much, Mark. Really appreciate it. Everybody, Mark is on Twitter, Mark Schofield, one of the kindest people. In fact, this is not a joke. And because he's here, it's not a lie. It's the total absolute truth, Mark. I think I've told you this before. My wife is a big fan of who you are on Twitter. She's always telling me, Mark is so kind. Mark gets it. He's just one of the better follows that there is. So Mark really is one of the best people in the NFL space.
That means a ton. That really means a ton. Tell your wife I said thank you. I'm sure she's going to watch this and listen to this anyway. But if she's not,
course. Yeah.
Thank you, and congratulations to you, of course, on the upcoming news.
Thank you again, Mark. You are here because of your genius and your wonderful, glowing personality. But over the last couple of weeks, there has been some discussion that Dak Prescott's throwing motion has been altered or changed, however you want to put that, as a result of the muscle strain, the lat muscle, everything. Lots of thoughts and discussion that maybe this injury specifically from his ankle issue or combined issue and injury, which is maybe an efficient form of speaking, that he suffered last October. And so you are here to help us kind of break this down. We have some stills, we have some videos. We are your students, Mark. So I will go where you want to. Mark has studied these materials ahead of time. So what example do you want to point to first to kind of show us? Do you want to look at Dak prior, maybe previous Dak in 2018 to kind of set a baseline here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we should start, sort of the stills in 2018.
Okay.
And I do think it's sort of important that I think a couple of things are happening here, both from the stuff you sent me. I went back and I rewatched last night to get ready for his game against Atlanta last year to get a sense more for the lower body mechanics, which I know aren't really part of the discussion, but I do want to touch on that. But I think, look, we could start here. You see sort of the lower ball placement in carriage, right? Particularly that middle frame where ball's kind of here, right? And then it's getting up to here. I think what's happened over the course of Dak's time in the league is they've tried to improve the arm slot and his release point. Because you see here, particularly that third frame where that ball is sort of behind, the elbow is forward, which is good. You want the elbow forward. That's good. The release point is a little bit sort of behind his helmet almost, and it's not really fully extended. And then if you flip to these pictures, these three stills from July, where he's got the red non-contact jersey on, you look at that third frame, you see the release point and how it's different. You see how the ball isn't back as far as it was. The elbow is still forward where you want it. You've got that L forward to the arm, but the release point is more over the top. So I think what we've seen partially happen is an adjustment of the arm angle and the arm slot over the time he's been in the National Football League. We see a lot of quarterbacks when they're in college, they can kind of get away with looser mechanics, right? Because the athletes aren't great. Even Dak played in the SEC. There's a difference between making the jump from the SEC to the NFL. So you can get away with looser mechanics when you're in college, but you need to tighten them up, make them crisper, have a quicker release point, a more consistent release point. And so I think that's part of the process that's been going on from 18 to 21, trying to get a more consistent arm slot. But there's also something else that's happening. And I do think I want to give a plug to, I believe their Instagram account is at VQBDocs. On Instagram. They're two private quarterback coaches in the Tennessee area, I believe. And I shared this with URJ. It was a fascinating little breakdown they did of Dak's mechanics, which gets more to the idea that he's compensating for that shoulder injury. And in some of what they put together, they're showing you that Dak is kind of really sort of pulling himself through throws, right? Where he's sort of really twisted into throws. Now, torque is sort of, I'd say, a double-edged sword. You need that upper body torque to sort of pull yourself through throws. There's a great discussion of that in this book where Coach Axman talks about how your front arm has to pull you through throws. Otherwise, you're just going to be an arm thrower. A way to get good velocity is to have that arm and really pull yourself through. When I was playing, my coaches always had me doing medicine ball drills with the left arm to pull yourself through throws, and that's good. But what Dak might be doing is to sort of compensate for that lat and shoulder injury. He's really relying on that almost to a violent point to really torque himself through throws. And the QB docs sort of had some breakdowns where you could see his body twisting. You could see him sort of leaning a bit to the left. And that's going to, fool around with that release point. As you're violently turning, now the release point that was here is now here, and it's kind of throwing things off kilter. The other thing that they highlighted that I thought was fascinating was his right foot. There are times when he's a bit more sort of bow angled with the toes pointed out as he's trying to then drive off throws. And that's going to mess with your sort of hip clearance and hip turn. And something I love to tell people, and something that I do as well. And you can almost see it in that middle still, right? You see that back right foot.
Right, the toe kicked out, right?
The toe kicked out, exactly, RJ. Something I always say, something I do myself, if I start getting into mechanical discussions, I just do it. I just grab a football and I start doing it. So anybody watching this, anybody listening to this, grab a football, pretend you have a football, whatever, point your toes out wide and then go through a throwing motion. You'll feel that weird sort of twist in your midsection, in your hips. And then if you do it with, your feet are sort of parallel, and then you can sort of point the toes to the target with your lead foot, you'll feel it's a little easier to clear your hips through the throwing motion. And that again gets to the torque. So two things might sort of be working against him. You got those toes pointed out. It's tough to turn the hips, but then you try to violently pull through, and that's going to create this sort of, forces working against each other. And so I think he's got a couple of things going on. I know this is a long-winded answer, but he's been trying to adjust that arm slot. He's been trying to make that more consistent with a more consistent release point. But he's also, A, compensated for that lat injury a bit, and B, the footwork is a bit working against him now.
Right. So these stills, let's put them back up here one more time. These are from just before the lat injury became public knowledge. This is just a few days before Dak Prescott pulled himself from Cowboys practice. But I think it's safe to assume that the origins of that injury are already lurking within him here. We do have some stills of Dak throwing last Saturday against the Houston Texans compared to his 2019 form. We have a few of these, but you can kind of see now looking at him, we don't have that upper, at least right here. Yeah, he's still in the process of getting up there, at least compared to what he used to be by 2019. Dak's mechanics, I think you would agree, Mark, had significantly improved as he was becoming a more stable, more legitimate passer in the NFL. But here in the process on Saturday night against Houston, we can see Dak winding up and getting there, but it's still like that elbow seems bent a little bit, to the common man, to the RJ Ochoa here. This looks closer to that 2018 form we saw and I know he's still working his way back, but at least you look in 2019, that arm's obviously all the way extended out, and we haven't quite seen that yet from Dak, at least in his return. Is this the difference that people are starting to see now when they look back on maybe what was previous or what was his motion back in July, where he's coming up all the way over the top like you're talking about here, versus coming out with his elbow still a little bit bent?
Yeah, I think so. And it's just sort of a common sense then, right? If you've got pain, like, not to compare myself to Dak Prescott, because that would be ridiculous. That would be ridiculous. But I've got a torn labrum in my right shoulder that probably needs surgery, that does need surgery. And so anything extended with that sort of shoulder injury is difficult. Like just putting the arm out, it hurts. It puts pressure on it, puts strain on it. Anything closer to the frame is a bit more comfortable. It's not as painful. And I think that's what you're kind of seeing here. You look at that 2019 still, you got the extension there. Now it's a bit more of a 3/4 rather than full overhand, but you've got that extension. It's comfortable. It doesn't hurt. Doesn't cause you pain. When you have to bring it in because you're dealing with that sort of shoulder, that lat injury, it doesn't cause you pain, but then it starts to mess up at that release point. You want to keep things closer to you, keep things tighter. It doesn't cause you pain, but then you're getting that elbow issue. You're getting sort of that tough rotation in the shoulder, and you're getting the sort of body compensating for an injury. The human body, it will find ways to get things done if you're dealing with injuries, and this might be what we're seeing with Dak.
So is this reason then Because the first place my mind runs is to be concerned. Because what we've heard, and this night specifically, again, this was last Saturday night against the Houston Texans, Jerry Jones, Mike McCarthy, everybody involved. Dak is fine. If the Cowboys had been playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers that night, he would have played. This is just one still, and we do have some footage to get to in a moment. But I mean, is there reason to be concerned, or is this just one small data point?
I think now it's one small data point because, again, the overarching view that I have on passive mechanics don't matter until they matter. And what I mean by that is this: as long as the football is getting where it needs to be, what it needs to be there, then I really don't care what the mechanics look like. You might want to tinker with things, release points, footwork, and things like that. But if you're putting the ball consistently where it needs to be on time, in rhythm, and giving your receivers a chance to make good catches and get yardage after the catch, the mechanics don't bother me. But if it's a situation where these adjustments to mechanics, whether, positive adjustments in terms of trying to get a more consistent release point, or if you want to use the phrase negative adjustments, i.e. doing different things to compensate for an injury, if that starts to then impact the results, right? So if Dak is missing throws, or if he's late with throws because of adjustments, because of compensating for that injury, then you do sort of have a problem. Then you do have a reason to be worried. And so sitting here right now, it's easy to say I'm not too worried about it. It's a data point because we haven't seen it really impact things. But say he goes out week one and he's missing throws, he's airmailing stuff, he's late on throws because of the release point, because he's compensating for things, or he's overthrowing things because he's torquing violently to compensate for that injury, then I do think we have a problem. So here, right now, it's easy to say I think it's a data point. If we start seeing impacts on the field in terms of the results being, poor, then yeah, I think there's reason to be worried.
So before we get to the videos, Mark, I do want to get back to the toe kick out that you talked about here. John Kitna was very integral in Dak Prescott's growth as a passer, certainly mechanically throughout the 2019 season, and worked with him a lot on his footwork specifically. I don't know that we can specifically connect these two dots to one another, but for the purposes of this conversation, we'll entertain it. Lots of people, as you've seen, Mark again does better analysis on quarterback mechanic than anybody in the business. But lots of people have connected, again, this lat issue to the ankle issue, that he's been overcompensating, a theory that has been dispelled by people close to the Cowboys. But do you think that the origin could be as simple as, not that it's a simple thing, but this toe kick out, that he is applying more torque, that has been something that has been developing over time as he's become a more aerial passer? Dak is one of the deeper passers in the NFL, at least in terms of attempts and air yards and things like that. Is that the inciting force? Is that the catalyst? If we trace it back far enough, could it be the catalyst, I suppose?
It could be. I mean, I always try to caution a little bit of patience when we deal with quarterbacks that are coming back from a lower body injury, because the lower body is such the foundation for throwing the football. You look at quarterbacks like Deshaun Watson, like Carson Wentz, like Jimmy Garoppolo, like Joe Burrow right now, Tom Brady coming back from, now they had ACL injuries, but anytime you're working your way back from a lower body injury, the foundation of the throwing motion, it's going to take some time, and you might start to compensate in other ways. If you're not feeling like you could step into throws and, drive off the back foot and then finish strong through the front foot, you're going to compensate it for it other ways, which might include violently torque and really sort of throw it. And then that might put more strain on your shoulder. That might put more strain on your arm. If you're light with your lower body, heavy with your upper body, that could sort of take a toll as well. And so if he's got that toe kick out to try to find different ways to sort of generate force and then really violently finishing through throws, that could have potentially led to the strain. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a specialist in body movement. Brandon Thorne is probably better to talk about it than I am. He's fantastic in that realm. But I think that's potentially something that could happen, because you've seen other quarterbacks sort of work their way back slowly from lower body injuries when they don't have that confidence in the lower body. They become a little bit more of an arm thrower to start because they're not really pushing off the drive leg and finishing strong through the front leg. That could have sort of contributed here as well.
That's interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so let's take a look at Dak. This is in 2019. Just kind of warming up here as we get the video going. And this is that what you're talking about right here as we pause it. Just complete, almost like over the top, almost like a pitcher, like a little league pitcher, not a sidearm pitcher or anything like that. This is standard, obviously, for him, or what has or had become the standard at least. This is that motion that you're talking about. Granted, he's just warming up. This is just walking, but there doesn't seem to be that much pressure on the lower body in this particular example.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, this is it's still like what you do in practice, what you do in warmups is what you're going to want to do during a game. And I mean, I think this is a pretty fluid throwing motion. You see that lean, you see the finish through the front foot, you see that high release point coming over the top of the ball. I mean, again, mechanics are what they are, but I think for Dak Prescott, this is a really good view of sort of clean passing mechanics and what you could expect to see from him when he's healthy.
So, okay, we've established that everything is good there. Let's take a look at this. Was last week in Arizona. This is the warm up. So these are the throws that the Cowboys have, been specific about. They've been purposeful about getting him opportunities. And so we look at him here, Mark, and these are light. He's not really stepping a lot into these. But your analysis.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you see the release point. It's better. You do see the sort of ball is back a bit more. The elbow's a bit more forward. You see that right foot. He's sort of struggled with the placement a little bit. I say struggle, and that might not be the right word, but there are some times where it's a bit more bowed out than it is other times. That time it was a bit more bowed out. Other times, like there, it looks a bit more sort of pointed parallel, and you see a nice crisp throw there. And so I do think that, look, he's working through some things mechanically. He's got two things going on injury-wise, both in the lower and the upper body that he's sort of dealing with. So it might be a bit of a work in progress. But, I think generally, you see the elbow is out a bit more. The release point is a bit more closer to the body, like we talked about, rather than sort of fully over the top. So that might be that sort of injury load that we were talking about earlier. He's sort of dealing with the toe placement and things like that. So there are things that he's working on. But the fact that he's throwing and, the ball look, velocity, rotation, all that stuff is crisp. So that's good to see. And so I think there are reasons to be optimistic. But yeah, he's still working through some things mechanically, I think, because of both the upper and the lower body injuries he's dealing with.
So if he does revert to this elbow kick out that we saw in 2018, what is, and again, that could be whether like purposeful or like on a deep psychological level, like a subliminal overcompensation for him. What are the effects of that? Because I think that's now, certainly that's not something I'm paying attention to just after, 17 minutes of conversation here right now, is that elbow and seeing, because it does seem to kind of like, I don't know a technical way to say this, but to kind of line up evenly with his shoulder upon, like release point almost. And we saw that a little bit in the warm up against Arizona. What are the domino effects of that? Because that's something he'd gotten away from sort of.
Right. I think sort of a lower release point can have a couple of different issues. You might see passes get batted down. I mean, when you're releasing the ball sort of here, as opposed to here, 6 inches is a lot in the NFL. I mean, it's a game of inches. Al Pacino told us on Any Given Sunday, it's a game of inches. So that could be, yeah, exactly. You die for that inch. But there are also other things, right? Think if he's trying to drive a throw into a sort of window downfield. Now you've really got to sort of gear up for that, as opposed to coming over the top. That again gets to that sort of twisted and torqued and all that stuff that the QB docs were talking about. Again, a shout out to those guys. And so release point is going to be something to keep in mind. Trajectory on throws, trying to fit throws over underneath second level defenders and in front of third level defenders. That might be a little bit tougher. Try to get arc on throws, release from here to here might be a little bit tougher. You can almost see in that third still there, sort of the nose of the ball is up, but you're coming from here. That, try to do that. Like put your arm like this and twist the nose of the arm up. You'll feel that strain in the back of your shoulder, right?
Right. Totally.
There you go. And so again, this entire discussion, anybody that's watching or listening, I would implore you, try to mimic this stuff. You'll get a feel for it. Even if you just sit in a chair doing it, you'll feel what Dak is working through. And so that's stuff to keep an eye on. But, balls getting tipped, trajectory on throws, that's going to be something to watch if he is sort of having the same 2018 throwing motion.
This might be a dumb question, but I think about golf a lot with stuff like this, like with overcompensation. I play golf a lot in the Rio Grande Valley where it's really windy. And so like, again, on a deep psychological level, I don't realize that I've overcompensated for that wind. And so when I go and play somewhere that isn't windy, for example, like I'm hitting all these lower shots that like I'm not that great of a golfer to the point that I'm doing these things purposefully, but they're just things that you like naturally do. Your body does. And so like as a result of this motion and comparing this one to early 2020, this is in Seattle, which we can see this looks like, he's coming out at a more straight top point. What's the likelihood of like a curve? Because it does kind of feel like your body could, or at least when you have me put my arm up, like my body could be more prone to applying a level of curve on it. So the release point is now not something that's only impacted, but the movement of the ball, for lack of a particularly technical term.
Yeah, I mean, I think the golfing analogy is a good one. And, anytime you start to feel something get awry and you start to compensate for it, like if you're, slicing everything, you're going to sort of change your aim and point. You're going to change your footwork. You're going to change your swing. You might change your hands. Then things start to sort of cascade from there, right? It's better to sort of work through it with the same swing rather than trying to fix things in the middle of the round. I mean, I've been there too. I think what's interesting, though, is it's easy to sort of try to tinker and fix things when you're trying to hit a stationary ball. It's a lot tougher to sort of tinker and fix things when Aaron Donald is trying to put you in the hospital. I mean, that's the sort of other thing to keep in mind about the game of football and play in the quarterback position, because you're trying to do all of this while act as a computer and a passer, right? You're trying to decipher coverages. You're trying to read defenses. You're trying to stay alive. And then you're trying to have a replicatable throw in motion. That's the thing about golf, to go back to that analogy. You want a repeatable swing every time you swing a club.
Right.
You want a repeatable swing as best as you can every time you throw a football, but you're not swinging a golf club with Aaron Donald at your knees. And so that's the problem. Like these adjustments, these tinker and all this stuff that's going on, he's trying to get a football from point A to point B while trying to stay alive. He's going to find any way to do that. That might be part of the compensation we're seeing right now. And that's going to be something to watch. Like how could it lead to a curve and spins on throws and things like that? Perhaps it could lead to some missed throws more than anything else. And he's going to have to sort of fix that in the middle of a round, to continue the analogy with the Aaron Donalds of the world trying to cause him bodily harm.
Interesting. Thank God Aaron Donald's not on the golf course.
Exactly. That's terrifying to think about.
That's a great point. This is from last Saturday night. Last Friday night is the great Katy Perry song, but last Saturday night against Houston. No Aaron Donald here and going through his reads, doing his motion. But what do you see, Mark?
I think the reads and, getting a feel for working your eyes and your feet are good. That first one, you saw a little bit more of unsettled feet. And again, he's trying to simulate pressure. He's trying to simulate reads and things like that. And so, I'm not going to get too sort of nitpicky on it, but I think it's smart that he's trying to do this. I think it's smart. You see it there. A little bit of happy feet, a little bit of staggered feet, choppy steps in the pocket, but he's trying to simulate as best as he can game situations. I think the release point, particularly on that Band-Aid post route right there, that's nice. That's over the top. That's fluid. That looked pretty good. I think that's a good example of, you see stuff like that coming over the top, good release point. That's what you want to see. This is fluid, in rhythm, in motion. I don't have it on my whiteboard right now, but a while ago I have TRAP, right? Time and rhythm, anticipation, placement. That's the sort of analogy that I use talking about quarterbacks all the time. Time and rhythm, anticipation, placement. You see that in that throw in motion there. It's fluid. The footwork is timed up really well. There he's trying to, again, simulate pressure, so the steps are choppy and things like that. But, I think there are good things to look at. Yeah, the elbow is a little bit flared out there, but it's still more over the top than out. So I think the release point is better. But it does seem like through all the stuff we've talked about, there is this sort of struggle to find that consistent arm slot and release point, working through injuries, upper body and lower body. That might be something he's going to be struggling with all season.
Yeah, and I think that might be, there was the report that happened at halftime of the Cardinals-Chiefs game on Monday night of Adam Schefter saying he might not be fully back all year, et cetera. This release point looks a little bit more kind of like we talked about, the full rotation of the arm over. I think this is such a fascinating conversation, and I think this question is one that you have thought about a lot over the course of your career and your life, and one that every average fan has. How, and maybe it's just there's a simple answer of always, but how how often is he thinking about this? Like, how you talked about like trying to, because you talked about trying to replicate the golf swing, to go back to that, but there's the process of designing the swing, as we talked about. Like, you go to the range, right? Like and you're right. Like, if you're a big slicer, you're aiming left or whatever. So to your point, you kind of have to go into a round and say, you know what, this round I'm just going to aim left, and there might be the occasional hole off the tee where my drive, I pure it straight, and I just deal with the consequences. I just, those are the pros and cons to what I'm working with here. But so how aware from a windup standpoint is Dak of, you know what, like, I'm not going to kick my elbow out here. I'm going to try to keep my elbow more pointed. I'm going to try to wind up properly. Or does the natural Aaron Donald-ness of it all kind of take over and things become a little bit more barbaric?
This is something that we see a lot with quarterbacks that are dealing with more, I'd say, difficult mechanical situations to work through. Take Blake Bortles, who's an example I bring up a ton, right? With Blake Bortles, you always had that dip, loop, and throwing motion, right? It was like a trebuchet, that medieval siege weapon that's like looping around. Sam Darnold had it too. And every preseason you would hear Blake Bortles, he's cleaned up the mechanics, training camp, looks nice, crisp, pristine, balls up over the top, not dropping it, the elbow or anything. The second the season started, muscle memory kicks in. And that's one of the things that's so hard to work through as a quarterback, because you will spend, March through August refining your mechanics on perhaps a daily basis. You're working with coaches, you're working with private quarterback coaches, you're doing video stuff, you're constantly working that throwing motion, throwing, 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 passes a day, trying to get that arm slot right, trying to get everything right. But muscle memory kicks in. Once the games begin. And that's something the quarterbacks are always sort of trying to deal with. Carson Wentz, Josh Allen. There are obviously more recent examples of quarterbacks that have sort of tinkered with their mechanics and actually done it right. Then you get the Tim Tebows of the world that never was able to get it right. And so, ultimately it comes down to the quarterback himself. Can he put the work in? Can he do the things necessary to get that mechanical stuff fixed? So when muscle memory kicks in, the good memories kick in and not the bad ones. For Cowboys fans, there's reason for a ton of optimism in this realm. Why? Look at where Dak was when he was a senior at Mississippi State and how he was able to perform as a rookie in the NFL. I'm somebody that missed wildly on Dak Prescott. Part of the reason I missed on him, I didn't give his competitive toughness enough weight in my evaluation process, which is something I've now written about and changed in my own process. But he has that competitive drive to fix things, to do the work necessary so that when the game starts flying for real and the Aaron Donalds of the world are coming after him, the good muscle memory kicks in, not the bad muscle memory. So, RJ, quarterbacks are always dealing with this. The great ones, the elite ones, the ones that are able to succeed in the NFL have the ability to do enough work that the good muscle memory kicks in when it's game time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And certainly as Dak evolves from an intellectual standpoint, things he can handle before the snap, obviously have an impact on what happens as well, which is exciting. And I think most Cowboys fans are at a point of, stable optimism, but because it is your franchise quarterback, any sign of distress is smash the glass in case of emergency sort of situation. If we take a look, Mark, here at now a comparison, this is that 2019 example versus what he's been doing so far this season. What do you see as the biggest differences? Because again, this is post-injury. And so this is, these are both warm-up, type situations. These aren't in-game. But obviously, there is a difference in terms of who he's just progressed as and become over the course of last season. Because I think the example here being 2019 is so fascinating because Dak Prescott obviously put up a lot of gaudy stats early part of 2020, but missed the entire. So now we're talking about a guy who's gone an enormous amount of time without playing at a high level in terms of just starting in the NFL, and now is dealing with reality coming off of the ankle injury, coming off of now this lat issue. So what striking differences, positively or negatively, do you see between these two motions?
I mean, the one thing that really sort of stands out is the positive shoulder angle in 2019, where you see the shoulders are really pointed up, sort of as he's driving through that throw, where shoulders
like right here,
like right there. Yeah, you see how you can see the P is well above the T on his nameplate. That left shoulder really pointed up, whereas in the 2021 example, it's more of a parallel plane, slight rise to it, but not a lot. When you see that shoulder pointed up, that quarterback is really loading up on that back leg, and you do want to put more back weight on the back leg than the front leg, but not a ton. It's like a 60-40 proposition here. It's like almost like 80-20, and he's just throwing at warmups. He's not trying to really drive something downfield where, yeah, you might see a little bit more load on that back leg. So I do sort of like in the 2021, it's more fluid, a more even displacement of weight from the front to the back foot, which is a good side considering he has the lower body ankle injury that he's working off of. So I think that's a good thing. You do see the toe point to the back right leg here in that 2021 example. So that is something to highlight. But I think it's that shoulder angle. And again, Steve Axman, Coach Axman talks about that sort of, you want that even weight displacement. I've plugged this book so many times, and it never leaves my arm's reach, believe me. You want that sort of even balance to the weight, front leg, back leg. Here in 2019, it seems like he's really putting a lot of weight on that back leg, which causes that shoulder angle. You see the P above the T and all that stuff that we talked about, gets the release point and all that stuff. I like that he's more balanced in 2021.
And I know these are different throws, so they're not both same distance, same attempts, same routes, whatever. Right. So you have to factor all that in here. But just looking at this still specifically, it does also seem like his hips are wider in 2019 versus a little bit more inward here in 2021. And some of that's just the weight, I think, that you talked about. Obviously, It's a little bit more forward based in this 2021 example. And obviously the ball placement just within his hands. I mean, he's lower here in 2021 because he hasn't kind of cocked back. You're right. This 2019 example is something we tend to see, if a quarterback has a longer pocket, a longer developing play, he's winding up to hurl this thing 40 yards downfield. So these are different situations, but it is nice, to your point, to see some of these mechanic things be similar, because that at least gives a lot of positive hope towards the ankle issue, which I don't think anybody's worried about anymore at this point, but still a positive thing nonetheless.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just a quote from Coach Axman, slightly more weight is distributed to the back foot of the passing stance to help accommodate a pushing off action. Slightly more weight. And so in 2019, you see a lot more weight as opposed to 2021. And so I think, that 2021 example is a good example of him sort of shorter, not as wide a base. The hips can turn a little bit better, more even displacement of the weight throughout the body. As far as the release point, I think they're both pretty good here. But I think the lower body stuff is interesting to see the difference between 19 and 21.
Yeah, this is a more encouraging 21 example of the release point, back kind of where where we saw at least Dak operate at his peak. And I think everyone's going to be looking at that kind of bow elbow now and wondering if he is maybe not overcompensating, but at least just reacting towards what he's dealing with. We do have some stills, just comparing them again here. This all looks pretty similar to me, Mark, again, except for the release point. But again, this is just one moment, one example. We don't know exactly what he's targeting in these specific, on these specific plays. But overall here, I guess my question is there truth to the idea that his throwing motion is different post lat strain, which is the question everybody has on their minds?
I mean, I think there's some truth that it's a bit different. But I do think that ultimately the throwing motion has always been sort of a work in progress, something that he's working through. I think you could find some examples of him perhaps guarding the lat injury a little bit, perhaps doing some things like the QB Ducks and others have pointed out, try to get more torque on throws and things like that. But we could also find some clips where things look pretty good. And so now from here until week one, it's the battle of, okay, let's get it from pretty good sometimes to pretty good all of the time. And I think that's the thing that he's sort of working through. Again, try to work to that point where on a consistent basis, the good muscle memory kicks in. But again, I think there are reasons for optimism about Dak. In my mind, he's one of the game's elite passers. I think I had him like QB6 coming into this year. I think he's somebody that you watch over the arc of his career. You can see he's now gotten to the point where the game is completely slowed down for him in his mind. He's making anticipation throws. Before he got hurt last year, he had an anticipation throw on an in-cut against Atlanta that was one of my favorite throws of the entire season last year. That's how good I thought he played. And so, yeah, let's get to a point where the good muscle memory kicks in and we can go back to having him be a joy for me to watch every Monday when I get to sit down and watch it. Because before he got hurt, man, I got to tell you, RJ, he was one of my favorite quarterbacks to watch last season before the injury. I've loved his career arc. I'm just blown away by the work that he's put in. Again, I was somebody that was not a Dak believer when he was coming out. He proved me wrong. He made me reevaluate my process, which is a good thing. I think the world of him as a quarterback, and I really want to see him having a great year this year.
That's a really great note to end on, Mark. And my last question as it relates to Dak's mechanics are, what makes him among your favorites? Like what does he do specifically that you enjoy? I mean, because that's you've provided a lot of educational material for people to watch. What are those things for people to kind of watch and continue to learn, continue to admire Dak Prescott in the way that you do?
What's been fascinating for me is an area that I thought he struggled was that ability to make anticipation throws. And what I mean by that, there's different ways to make anticipation throws. Like, if you think about the deep out route, like throwing it before the break, like, yeah, that's an anticipation throw. And he's gotten better there. But what I really love to see, RJ, are those moments where he anticipates throwing windows, like that dig route where you've got underneath defenders, you've got the first window between, say, the hash marks and the first linebacker to throw it in, or that second window between the two linebackers where you can let that ball go before that receiver clears that first linebacker and throw him open into that second window where you're not a see it, throw it passer. A great story I love to tell. Years ago, Ben Roethlisberger was hurt for a Patriots Steelers game. Landry Jones was playing. This was when, Phil Simms was still in the booth before Tony Romo. And that's how old I am, friends. I played when we wore leather helmets. That's another story for another time. But they told the story, Nance and Simms up in the booth, of Antonio Brown, who was with the Steelers. Again, that's how old the story is, was talking to Landry Jones during that week of practice. And he told Landry Jones, if I see you throw the football, it's too late. You have to get that ball out before I'm looking at you. If I see you throw the football, it's too late. Early in his career, Dak was a see it, throw it guy. He's not anymore. And so see that developmental evolution of Dak Prescott from great athlete, tremendous raw talent, put all the work in, rookie of the year type guy, to where he is now, where he's making those kinds of throws where it's like Brady-like in a sense. That's been the best part of his career arc to me to see that, see the work that he put in, unlock that potential and ability. That's why I love watching him. I love seeing the growth in a quarterback. He's a great example of quarterback growth, and I'm just so excited to see what he does this year.
That is quite the hype story here.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Phil Simms replaced by a better quarterback in the booth than Tony Romo, and everything is
everything just cascades from there, right, RJ?
Exactly. Mark is on Twitter at Mark Schofield. You can read him at Touchdown Wire. You can read him in a lot of places, actually. Mark, where do you have work coming out just generally so people can know? Because, again, you educate people in a way that nobody really does. And for that, I've always been grateful. But so people can know, where can all your big content found this season?
Well, RJ, always a blast to be on with you, buddy. You can find me Touchdown Wire, USA Today. You can find me at SB Nation over at Pat's Pulpit, over at Bleeding Green. If any Cowboys fan actually wants to listen to an Eagles podcast, I host one with my wonderful and incredibly brilliant co-host, Rachel Prevet. She's awesome.
She's great.
She's just tremendous. Her and I host the QB Factory every week, where we talk about quarterbacks from an Eagles perspective, but we will dive into opposing quarterbacks. So you might want to listen to that before the Cowboys play the Eagles, because we will be talking about Dak Prescott. But on Twitter, on the Bird app, on the Steakum app, at Mark Schofield is the best way to find me.
He is the kindest person that there is. He is good for any Scrubs reference. Your favorite episode of Scrubs while we finish?
My screw up. It has to be my screw up.
True.
I mean,
great point.
I did the rewatch last summer, RJ, and when that episode, I sort of did it with the podcast.
The Zach Braff, Donald Faison one.
Right. One, yeah. And when you got to that episode, man, that podcast was incredible, because the episode where they talked about doing that show, John C. McGinley, who's just a tremendous character actor who plays Dr. Cox, he told the story about when they were recording that episode, he was going through a divorce. He was in a really tough spot, and he would carry around these notebooks where he would write all those like long-winded soliloquies and speeches that, the showrunner Bill Lawrence would write for him. And he wrote out this like poem, and the name of the poem escapes me right now, but I was listening to that episode in my car. It was the day after Christmas. I was driving out to a Best Buy, like 60 miles away, to get like Joy-Cons because we didn't get enough for the kids on Christmas. And I had tears like streaming down my face listening to this speech. He was talking about where he was in his life and his failures as a husband and as a father. And it just really sort of hit me. And so that episode, when I rewatched it, and Zach Braff turns to him and says, "Where do you think we are?" That moment where it hits you, and even knowing going in, like goosebumps and tears and all of that. Like, the show is tremendous. And obviously, if people are watching Ted Lasso, you see sort of roots in
the Bill Lawrence
right?
vibes.
The Bill Lawrence, like it's there, like, and there's so much to it where, Scrubs was a show about doctors, but it was a show about so much more than that. It's a show about relationships and a show about emotion and things like that. That's Ted Lasso. It's a show about soccer generally, but it's about more than that. It's about the relationships these people are building. And so you see the underpinnings of Ted Lasso in Scrubs. You see so much of that moment. Where do you think we are? You saw it in this week's episode where, Jason Sudeikis turns down the touchline and he sees, Roy Kent's coming out. So it's my screw up for me. But what about you? I mean, I'm just one chucklehead.
I mean, it's hard to beat that. And I don't have, I don't have a soliloquy myself to really go to bat for this. I have always loved, this isn't my favorite, but it for the purposes of expanding the conversation here, we live in a different era of television, even with like the Ted Lassos now. When a series had a musical episode, it was weird. Generally, and it was kind of a Hail Mary sort of thing for a lot of different shows. But when I found out Scrubs was going to do it, I was kind of bummed. But the musical episode is so beautiful, and the final number is really beautiful. Like that's the heart of the show, which you talked about. Like it's a show that wears its heart on its sleeve, which is what makes it amazing. Is that idea is evident in everybody, not just Dr. Cox when he wants to, not just JD, not just Turk, but Carla, Dr. Kelso, Ted, the janitor. I mean, the heart is Scrubs, or even like, these are really popular moments, but when Ted sings "Hey Ya" at the wedding, like that is such a beautiful Scrubs moment.
Yeah.
And that's Scrubs is a show that made me love my friends more than any other show, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. It again, you see parallels to Ted Lasso too, because I think one of the things about both shows is that you watched it and you sort of reevaluate your own relationships, and you reevaluate like who you are and how you interact with people and what you can do for your friends and your loved ones. And, if for a television show to do that, whether it's Scrubs or Ted Lasso, is pretty impressive. I mean, there have been shows that I have loved, Lost, Game of Thrones, 6 Feet Under, whatever. I mean, 6 Feet Under kind of did that because of obviously the theme of the show. Not to the extent that these two shows have done it, though. And so I think that's a tremendous accomplishment. And it just goes to show you the talent, in Bill Lawrence and the writers and the actors and actresses and what they've done. And so, Scrubs will always be one of my favorite shows for that ability to sort of make you think about, okay, I've just watched this. Now how do I be better?
If you're not following Mark, I mean, what are you doing with life? I mean, he is this person. If Scrubs and Ted Lasso were a hybrid person, they would be Mark Schofield. Mark, you're a genius. You're great. You're kind. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Blogging the Boys. You are the best.
Thanks, buddy. Always a pleasure.